the business at hand.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is number 3 in a series of 4 of Introduction to Zen. And thank you for coming. Anybody have any comments or questions or anything about last week? I know we did some things there. Nicola?
I certainly made a lot of use of the subjects that you touched on, you know, the picking up, the holding on to, and the pushing away. That revealed a lot for me. So it's been really useful. Thank you for getting that thread going. That's been very good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Eased me out of a lot of places I didn't know existed, you know, so it's good to own them and be in touch, because otherwise they're a hindrance, aren't they? So that was very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what mindfulness is really about, is noticing the picking up and noticing the holding on and noticing the letting go. It's not that we shouldn't pick up things or hold on to things or push things away. It's just the being aware of it and understanding the effects of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, thank you for the work last week. I thought I was very familiar with the topic, but there was still a new points of view, and I would appreciate very much when we do more of this kind of work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Maria. I will. I've been reading, this is a book that I've had forever that I just pulled off my bookshelf a couple of weeks ago, that was actually published in 1973, but it's Thich Nhat Hanh, book called Zen Keys, a very, very lovely book. And sometimes I go back and read things over again, you know, over the years out of my library, and it seems like I always understand them a little better when I go through the second time or the third or the 10th time or whatever. There's some I've read many times. But I would recommend this book. It's Thich Nhat Hanh is very clear and very, he has a very gentle, nice way of putting things. But he, you know, still talks about the fundamentals of Zen. And the principles, insights that we have around impermanence and karma, dependent arising, those kind of things. He has an interesting chapter in there about identity, and this really goes to what you were saying, Nicola, about, you know, we're picking up and holding and pushing away, and that when we have an insight into impermanence, we realize, and we may just have a glimpse, or we may have a deeper insight. These things can always expand. That we see that, you know, that nothing that we would call a thing is really what it is. That all things are made up of things that aren't that thing. The example he gives is, well, let's look at a table, and we call it a table, and that's convenient and it's fine. And we may have concepts about that table, like we like it or we don't like it, or we give it descriptions like it's brown and it's so tall and so wide and things like that. But that doesn't really describe it. These are just the words we use out of convenience, and they're fine to describe everything in the world around us. But if you look closer at the table, you know, it's made of wood, and it's probably got some bolts or screws in it, which are made of metal, and it's got varnish on it or some kind of oil maybe, and that's made of other things. And then if you look at the wood, for example, we call it wood, but if you look at it more closely, it's made up of all sorts of other elements that aren't tables and that aren't wood. They just come together to, or have come together to be what we call wood. And the wood has come together to be what we might call a table or a chair. But the fundamental truth of it is these words that we use and the concepts we have about things are just sort of laid on top of the reality to help us kind of navigate, reality. We need to know what a table is. We need to know what a chair is. We need to, we describe things and it's convenient and it's, but in Zen, we look at, we often say, see things as they are. Okay, which means to drop those concepts and see things as what they are, which is just manifestations of things that have come together that we've named table, chair, car, whatever. And that these things are constantly in change, constantly in flux, and they don't have an inherent or abiding identity. All the identities that we give to things are made up in our minds, and all humans do it. And we have many different languages. Even there's many words and many languages for a table, and we only understand that, in our own mind, our own way. And so the concepts that we have about things, we have to all sort of agree on, or at least the people closest to us have to agree on. And that's very difficult when everybody has a kind of a different idea about that. Like I could say it's a table, while somebody else could say, well, no, it's this or it's that. Now, it's not so complicated around sort of ordinary objects like tables and chairs, but it becomes very, very complicated when we're talking about each other and the concepts we have about each other and the concepts we have about ourselves. These are much trickier to pull apart, and yet they are the same. They're constantly in change. They're made up of other things, and those things are made up of other things, and those things are made up of other things. Like if you talk to a physicist, for example, and said, well, what is a table? He would say, well, it's trillions of atoms all buzzing around like bees that are in the shape of a table. Right? And even atoms have constituent parts that aren't atoms, like electrons and protons aren't atoms. They're only atoms when those things come together and are in orbit around each other. So this is the kind of insight, deep insight, that we are going for in Zen practice. But why? What's the point of that? I mean, isn't it fine just to call a table and a chair? And yeah, it is fine in its own way, except we're not seeing the deeper reality, and the deeper reality is more true than the concepts that we have. As a matter of fact, we would call that the ultimate truth. And even sort of going into it and identifying the constituent parts of a table, clear down to atoms and electrons and protons and the like, those are all names as well. And so the point is, and what we say is to drop all concepts. And that is the only way you can actually see and understand fundamental reality as a thing that's in motion, in time, and has no fixed identity in space. Okay. I know this is kind of heady and technical, but that's the fundamental reality. And so why would we not want to include that in our understanding of the world? So ultimately, we understand the world is impermanent and having no fixed identity, including ourselves and others and all objects. And hold that along with our concepts and our names for things. Okay, can we hold these two things at once? So in Zen practice, beginning Zen practice is all about just, first of all, pointing out that there are two sides of reality, you might say, one the relative and one the absolute. And most people, that's a big awakening right there. And we may have a glimpse into that in our meditation, or even just walking through the park, or maybe someday we're sitting somewhere and we just are so relaxed that we just kind of let go of our concepts, and we do have a glimpse of this fundamental reality. And it's quite astounding and quite beautiful to see the marvelous workings of the universe. And that insight makes a fundamental change in our lives in many ways. Because once you see something that's true, you can't really go back and see things the same way again. And so that's kind of the first step, is to have this glimpse, have this maybe even a bit of an intellectual understanding of these two truths. That's a kind of a partial awakening. And then Roshi refers often, and we call it a Kensho or a Satori type experience. And Gepo Roshi then talks about the next step, which is a Daikensho, which is a complete, not a glimpse, but a complete seeing into fundamental nature of reality as impermanent and having no fixed identities. And this is very impersonal, because in a way, your concepts about yourself and your own personal identity that we carry and we try to project to others also drops away. And it's like you're not there as a separate, you suddenly see yourself as not there as a separate thing, but as one with fundamental reality. And which is true, because if everything is the same way, is all made up of other constituent parts and has no basic identity, this is a true thing, then in a way, I too am just a manifestation of all of this, just like a table or a chair or a car or whatever else. And that's a kind of a wonderful feeling of that I am one with the universe. I'm not separate. And yet, from the relative side, obviously I see that I'm separate, and I look different than you do, and I lived at a different time and place than everybody else in the universe, and so both things are true at the same time. This is very hard to get to, but when you get to this Daikensho spot, you just see this oneness, but you've dropped the relative. And at that point, now you're in the opposite pair of shoes than you were at the beginning, when everything was relative and you didn't see the absolute. Now everything is absolute and you don't see the relative. And so it's another kind of stuck place that has its own set of problems. This is all described in Tozan's 5 ranks that Roshi teaches from a lot. So then from this sort of Daikensho, totally in the absolute viewpoint area, you have to start bringing in the relative back again, because it is also true. So these things happen in stages. And then finally there's a 5th stage where they're both completely integrated. And you see it all as one. You see the relative as one with the absolute as relative with one. And what's interesting to me too is when we do services, we chant the identity of relative and absolute as one of those chants, and it says it all right there. And I remember at the Zen Center, we would do services sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and we chant that thing, and it took years before I finally realized, oh my gosh, this is actually everything you need to know about Buddhism in this one thing. And but it takes a while to catch in. But at any rate, so why go through this whole process at all? It seems like a lot of work and a lot of new territory, and there's I myself, and I imagine a lot of people have experienced a little fear of even doing these things or attempting to do them, because I don't really want to change in a lot of ways. I just want to be Bruce like I've always been, the way I see me. But of course, that's just a delusion, right? Because I'm not really seeing myself clearly. And certainly nobody else is seeing me clearly either. And so this is the source of a lot of conflicts that we have in our relationships. Is I have a certain idea of who I am, and I want everybody else to see me that way. I want to be seen, right? And of course, they're doing the same thing. They want to be seen as what they want to, what they think they are. And so it's just this huge conflict of all these concepts. And so this is what the Buddha pointed to when he said life is suffering. It's just this constant clash of concepts internally and externally within ourselves. And it manifests within ourselves is when we have self-doubt, or we think things about ourselves that are wrong, not, I wouldn't say wrong, but are misleading or delusional and lead to behaviors that aren't artful. And then of course, when we get into tangles with everybody else, all of these concepts come clashing together, because neither side is really seeing the underlying truth that these are delusions. And yet we have to operate in the world of delusion, over and over in the various Buddhist canon, which is vast. It says enlightenment is delusion and delusion is enlightenment. Well, that's an interesting statement. How could that be? Well, and yet it's said over and over. So how do we get to the bottom of that one? Well, it's the same as what I've been saying, is that we have to see reality for what it is, and we have to see that includes delusion, and delusion is therefore enlightenment. Enlightenment is delusion. This is, I think, a lot of the reason why people who maybe pick up a book on Buddhism and read things like this just go, never mind. I'm going to do something else, But this wisdom has stood the test of time for almost 2,600 years, roughly. And why? Well, because it's been proven over and over and over again by people who have been there and done that, and it's not disputed by science or anyone. It's just difficult. So we set off on this path of awakening, and we hope for the best, right? We do our practice, and sometimes we are more diligent than others. Myself, I've gone up and down over the years in my practice, and sometimes fear comes up, sometimes laziness, sometimes life just interferes. But ultimately, the point is not to become all-knowing or always happy all the time, or have everything, have control over the world so that everything goes right for me, and my children are beautiful, and my lover is great, and my and I have money, and that's not the reason. The reason is strictly to know the truth. And as I don't even know where this statement came from, but know the truth and the truth will set you free. That may be from the Bible, I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's a true statement. It's much better to know truth than to not. And from truth, at least you can make as good a decisions as possible about what's happening in life, right? Like Louise, I know you've been through a lot, would you have preferred your doctors tell you the truth, or preferred that they kind of didn't?
What do you mean, tell me the truth?
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say tell me the truth, that I'm going to die or something, or what do you
Whatever, whatever they, when, if you're working with someone, or you're in a relationship, or you have a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you want to know the truth, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
I'd prefer to know the truth. Yeah.
We would know the truth. Of course, we all would, because how can we function if people aren't straight with us, right?
Mm.
And how can we make a decision if we don't know the truth? So Zen is, a truth-seeking religion, and unlike many other religions, we encourage constant questioning. Like a lot of religions just will say, well, here's the deal, and just accept it. And in Buddhism, we say, well, here's the deal, but question it. So I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. So it's a method, through meditation, through inquiry, through reading, through working with a teacher, through koans, through big mind, for all these different methods, in order to have a direct experience of these insights of the principles that are laid out, just so that you know the truth, and then you're on your own. And it's a bit of a solo journey, although, there's all of us along the way in the Sangha who help and support each other. There's teachers, but, you pretty much have to do the work yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit of a misconception, because the Buddha said, well, life is suffering, and this is the reason for it, and here's the way out. That I think a lot of people have taken that to mean, oh yeah, I get that life is suffering, I don't feel good all the time, and I want to get out. And so this is in a pop culture, particularly in the West, it's turned into maybe a little bit of a, do this and you're going to just be happy all the time. But, happiness and sadness and all these different things that we feel, and the consequences of karmic experiences, they're not always happy. They're not always good. Reality, life is still the same. It's just, if you know the truth, it's easier to deal with. And maybe the Buddhist should have said, life is a problem, but there's a way to make it easier to deal with, and this is how that works. Maybe I should write that book. But it's nice. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a bit now, but any questions or comments so far?
Well, I have something that I'm just dying to say about how brilliant that Zen insight was that you brought up, that I'm thinking about.
Well, thank you.
It's real interesting when you go to the doctor and you hear their truth, say, for what's going on for you, and then because you have that squarely in front of you, and this is from the expert what it's going to be, and then you beat those odds, and you say you meditate, and somehow you do something that makes your truth and what's happening for you radically different than from all the experts. You don't have to do that, but I think that's what the opportunity is for us all who are practicing. And I'm just having my eyes open to it. But that's the kind of wisdom, Bruce, that I think your insight is pointing to here. And that's more a heart-based thing than a head-based thing. My head's still not quite clear, but that's where my heart's at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, in Buddhism, well, in Japanese Buddhism, the word shin, it actually means heart mind as one thing. And sometimes what these insights are in the heart first, before they're realized in the mind, before we've attached a concept to it. Because well, let me talk about a little sort of mechanics kind of thing about how this works. Okay, we have these various senses, you know, eyes, ears, smell, taste, touch, those kind of things. This is how we get our information, right? And when we first see something, and this happens in an instant, when we first see something, the raw data that comes into our eyes is the direct experience of a thing. So if I look out in my room here, I can see, you know, the walls, you know, all the stuff in this room. But the first instant of it landing is just shapes and colors. And I haven't named anything yet. Okay. When I hear something, when it lands, there's no name with it. Like I'm not saying, oh, that's a robin singing or that's a dog barking. That comes later. The first thing is just the sound, just the touch, just the smell, just the sight. And within an instant, we will name it. And in whatever language we know. That's a robin. And then I'll say, and it's singing. Okay, so I make a noun and a verb and a, you know, adjective, and all this happens in an instant. And then once the thing's named, I can say, then I start to have even more complex concepts like, I wish that dog would stop barking because I'm trying to sleep. And then I might even say, I'm going to go shoot my neighbor's dog because it pisses me off so much. I mean, this is how things escalate, right? But that first experience, just the sound, is just a sound. And that is the underlying first thing that happens. That is our direct experience of the world as it is. Okay, that is the Kensho experience. That is the Daikensho experience. That's the actual experience of the reality of a sound or a sight or a smell, touch. Then within an instant, it goes to name, it goes to concept, it goes to judgment, it goes to taking action on that judgment. And this is, you know, can be based on all sorts of previous life experiences, or the mood you happen to be in at the moment, or the deeply rooted patterns and concepts. You know, maybe I got scared by a dog when I was a kid, and I've been scared by dogs ever since, my whole life, even though a dog has never threatened me. You know, but we carry these things. Last week when I was talking about picking up and holding, that's one of those things, right? So instead of just seeing the dog as what it is, a shape and a color, and, you know, and I can even name it, it's okay, this is not terribly harmful to say, oh, dog. But then when I go all of a sudden to, I'm scared of the dog, or I don't like the dog, you know, then there's fear, there's all sorts of things come up. It might go the other way. It might be, you know, every once in a while you read in the news about some kid at a zoo who goes, who thinks, oh, those gorillas, they look so cool. I'm going to climb over the fence and go down and be with them. You know, and then what happens? Well, the gorilla obviously isn't the gorilla sees the kid as a threat, right? And maybe would do it harm. And sometimes gorillas won't. They'll just like watch over the child until the trainer comes. You know, you just never know. But what I'm saying is that the concepts are the beginning of the delusions, and the delusions almost always send us off in maybe not the most wise direction. Not always, but you need to see them for what they are. And that's part of mindfulness. So fundamental mindfulness is seeing things as the raw data. Secondary mindfulness is being aware that I'm naming. Then the next levels of mindfulness are, I'm aware of the reaction that's happening. I'm aware of the truth of what's happening here. And now I need to nip it in the bud before it goes sideways or wrong. Okay. Now, can we do this 24/7? Yeah, but not right away. Okay. It takes practice. And this is why we have practices. And one of the practices that I've used for years is just bringing myself back, bringing myself back. So I'll be washing the dishes and I might be thinking about my grocery list or, whatever, or wishing somebody had rinsed off their plate before they put it in, put it in the sink, little things. And suddenly I'll go, oh, I'm going off on a tangent here. And I'll say, this is all one, everything is one. And just, I'll put myself back in that space where I just feel the water on my hands and I see the bubbles and I washing the dishes and, and I can just be there for a minute, for a few seconds or a minute. And then, I'll start thinking about something else and then I'll catch myself again. And sometimes I do it, pretty regular. And sometimes I don't do it for days, but this sort of bringing yourself back to being in touch with the reality that's in front of you is a practice, and it gets easier and easier, and it gets and you get more, it gets subtler and more precise in a way, or more, can't think of the word, but by practicing just sort of being one with what's in front of you, whatever you're doing, you start to get better at recognizing, being aware of your internal changes emotionally, states of mind. And you can be aware that, oh, instead of just being angry, I can go, oh, I'm being angry, which diffuses the anger immediately as soon as you step back and recognize it. Okay. Or, oh, I'm being sad. We all know people who have had bad things happen or whatever, and they get sad, and then they're sad for a long time, and then they get depressed, and then it sort of they hold it, they've picked it up and now they've hold it and they're dwelling on it, and everything else is excluded except they're focused on this feeling of things are bad and I'm sad and I'm nothing's ever going to be right, and this can lead to all sorts of problems. So being able to recognize your states of mind as you go through the day is a great practice for being able to bring yourself back to reality and see for what it is and just take care of what's in front of you. And that does lead to, I would say, if not a happier life, at least a life of more equanimity, of being solid in your center, being able to handle things that come along without getting knocked off your chair. Okay. And a feeling of confidence. Okay, Zen is not about avoiding pain, really. It's about avoiding the suffering that we add to pain. The famous Zen story about this is there's some I don't know guys in Japan or China or somewhere, and all of a sudden an arrow comes through the air, and it hits one of them, and he's got this arrow sticking out of him, and they go, "Oh, come on, we got to take it out, we got to go to the doctor," and he says, no, I'm not going to do anything until I find out who did this and why they did it and all these things. And it's like, what good is that going to do, right? But oftentimes, that story sort of illustrates it. You just deal with the event. Just get the arrow out and heal yourself. And if you want to spend time later trying to blame somebody or figure it out, it turned out it was just like a random thing and nobody intended it at all. It was just an accident. But he had caused himself more suffering by sitting there with the arrow in him while he stressed out over why somebody would have done this to him. There's another saying that this is not a Zen saying, but worry is interest paid in advance on borrowed trouble. Right? I love that one. So mindfulness is, and in this book of Thich Nhat Hanh's, he talks a lot about mindfulness along with all the other stuff that I've been talking about. And things that I've learned from him and Genpo Roshi and many other masters and books, it's good to, a lot of times reading the sutras and reading books and stuff about Buddhism is sort of frowned upon in Buddhism because there's so many stories too where they say it can't be understood intellectually, it can't be figured out intellectually, it has to be experienced, and that's true. But I've found that there are a lot of great teachers out there that have helped me understand these things and keep me on track of a lot of times just why I should continue to practice, because I know I have to experience it. I can't just think about it necessarily, but thinking about it and reading about it is also good. I don't know, I include everything. But definitely the experience is what does the trick. Because when you really see impermanence, when you really see dependent arising, it does change everything. In modern culture now, there's such a identity is such a big deal now. There's so many different groups, that want to have their identity recognized and their class protected, and And, people want to be called certain pronouns, and, it's not just about, whether you're gay or lesbian, or whether you're black or white or anything. It's just that everybody is so desperate to have an identity. And social media is such a enabler of that, where people, particularly young people more, I think, who put up their page and they put up everything wonderful about themselves and all the wonderful things they're doing. And, they want to be seen, right? And they want to be acknowledged, and they have an idea in their head about who they are and how they want people to see them. And of course, it's always, they want to be seen as amazing, right? And we all do in a certain way, of course, why not? But it's gotten to such a point where it backfires, because by focusing so strongly on a particular identity, you're really excluding everyone else. You're not seeing the world for what it is, that we're all humans, that we're all one, that we're all manifestations of the same underlying reality. And if people could see this, I think people would be a lot happier than when they check their phone every 5 minutes and, nobody's clicked the like button on their page and stuff. And then they get, they have despair over that, right? And and people do more and more outrageous things to get attention. It's really a sickness of modern society. It's sad. And so I think we need to be aware of how we might be doing this ourselves in some way or another, of clinging to an identity so strongly that we're actually excluding everything else. And yet, we pride ourselves on being really nice people and including everyone and honoring everyone and everything. And yet, if you don't, mosquito, every time we build this wall of identity around ourselves, it's just really putting ourselves in a prison and making it more difficult. We were talking at the beginning about, what's going on in Russia, and just think about the clash of identities there with this group of mercenary fighters who were fighting on behalf of Russia against Ukraine, who have now turned against Russia and are, what does it take for that to happen? Well, it takes people, having concepts and identities, and that I'm now feel so offended and I'm so betrayed. And just to even be out there doing these wars in the first place, but to have these kind of turns of events, it's just incredibly complex. But just another example of not enough people being awakened to the fundamental reality of life, that everything is one and everything is better when it's nurtured and not destroyed. I probably follow politics and world affairs too closely. It's always been a fascination of mine, but when I see it from the Buddhist perspective, it's just it's almost crushingly depressing for me in a way. It's like, oh my God, how can we turn this around? Just little bit by little bit, every person, Anyway, I'm really getting way off my introduction to Zen thing here. Sorry. Anyway, any questions, comments? See, I've got everybody all depressed and quiet.
If nobody else has a question, because my voice has spoke up a lot today, you guys.
No, go ahead,
But
Sam.
with Russia and everything, I missed it, and I can do my own research. But is everything radically different? And now the whole world, it's something else. I don't know, because I had a bad dream about Russia somehow, and I never think about Russia at all. But like, maybe it's just something I do the research on my own, and it's all out there. But it seems like somebody flipped their lid and is now, I'm going to live in a different reality, and that's just the way of things for a particular individual.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the thing that's in the news right now, Sam. You know, this same sort of problem is worldwide, you know, and manifests in different ways with greed, anger, and ignorance, basically. Ignorance of the truth of a fundamental reality, and the anger and greed that comes from that ignorance. And it manifests in every neighborhood, in every community, in every country around the world to varying degrees.
I just felt if I could do my part to be an open conduit, to take in all the teachings that you're trying to give here and all the Dharma and everything, to allow for me to be as free of my own impediments as possible, when a bunch of man-made craziness comes up and, oh, these people are doing this again. And you look at it from outer space like, wow, us human beings are up to our old shenanigans again or something. But just something to take on the teachings and be as free of self clinging and whatever one would want to say from the head about that as I can be. And just to be around you people who are on that same path, you know, it does my heart a lot of good to know that we're sharing back and forth how to do that. And I feel like I'm a real beginner here, but gosh, when we're faced with our own human whatnot, this just shenanigans, it's real tough, you know, but it's something that, thank God we've got Bruce and others here, because you're helping me to be like, I can open my eyes to something else I can do than just stay stuck in the whatever the toxic effect of our own ridiculousness is, just as human beings, whether we're Putin or whether we're whoever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And that maybe today we have the opportunity to do something about that, even if we're not in a position of global leadership or anything like that, just in terms of that spirit that I wouldn't even know how to come to terms with beginning. But, you know, Zen teaches that's where it's at, I guess. Yeah. You don't make it easier, but you make what I'm going through more profound in its own way, you know. So I really appreciate the teachings and the talk today.
Well, thanks, Sam. Yeah, I mean, it does. It just begins with each of us, you know, individually, and yeah, we just hope that we don't make things worse. Right. That's all we can do. I mean, the Dalai Lama for years said that, you know, I said, well, what are you teaching? He goes, be kind. Just be kind. It's like, okay, that's good enough. I don't even have to get into this stuff about the relative and the absolute and all this stuff. Just be kind. You know. But anyway. And you know, whenever I do these classes and I look at all of you guys and others that come, I always think, well, these people are already kind. These people are already nice people. And, you know, maybe I need to go stand on a street corner somewhere instead of being on Zoom. You know, Jesus, you know, I think would be totally happy with what we're saying today. And he, you know, he worked with the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the, you know, and I remember what the Roman soldiers that, you know, were torturing him, and, you know, did some good there. Yeah. And I don't expect all of you to go out and start preaching this to all your friends and things. Most people will just kind of go, yeah, well, thanks, Nicola, or thanks, Maria.
Yeah.
I see you're into it, and then you're a nice person, but not for me, But if you do get the opportunity to just invite someone to one of these classes, please do so, and just share your link with them and say, yeah, come on and just listen in. You don't even have to put your picture up, just come and listen. And maybe we can expand things a little bit that way. So
Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. How cool is that? My next door neighbor's kid is having a meltdown for the umpteenth time, and this has been going on for so long. Instead of me, what am I going to do? Say, hey, you guys should check out the Zen class. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And
right.
see what happens.
I can tell you probably what would happen. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, people aren't going to want to hear about, some religious thing, really. And it's there again, it's like, well, is that really the appropriate thing to do in that moment? Or is it more appropriate, what is the right thing to do there? Maybe it's to not mention Zen at all and just say, gosh, I really like you guys. Is there any way I can help, Or or would you rather I just butt out and not get involved in your family affairs, And, I mean, it does take some thought, and some awareness to kind of go, what's really the most skillful thing to do in a particular situation?
Yeah.
And,
well, and not even necessarily like what's the right skillful means and things, but being surprised, say, by the notion that these parents, maybe they don't quite know what to do, and we're all neighbors and whatever, and it is what it is of the world. But just to have them consider something like relative and absolute, just to consider, we live in the relative world and we live with the situation that we're living with, but then there's an absolute reality. And just to get into that philosophy for people who've never heard of it before, it's like, wow, that's a liberation from all the stuff that we don't have to talk, that we're stuck in the world living together. You never know. And so it'd be real interesting to hear about the real interesting surprises that could come up just by people who aren't into Zen being here and go, oh, there's relative and absolute. What's that about? I'll check that out. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or something even softer than that, like just leave a Thich Nhat Hanh book in their mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
That's because we can rely on these great teachers and some of these books to maybe do that for us, but whatever is appropriate. I mean, speaking of, I have a kid, and she's had meltdowns. I get it. It's not always the worst thing in the world. It just, but I have this, let's say it happens at the store, right? Where like you tell your kid, no, you can't have that candy bar, and they freak out. And so on one hand, I'm like, oh, my ego's at stake here. I don't want to be embarrassed in the store and have people think I'm a bad parent, right? So that's a very selfish kind of ego-centered reaction. But do I give in and say, okay, you can have the candy bar if you just shut up? How compassionate is that? And how wise is that? And so, I definitely, my wife and I talk about this kind of thing, and we read, books that sometimes have some very innovative and clever ideas about things like that. And one I saw the other day, there's these two parents standing there, and their kid is in the store, and he's laying on his back, and he's screaming, and he's throwing like this, and the parents just laid down next to him. and they didn't thrash around, they just laid down next to him. And the kid looked at him, and he kind of like snapped out of it, and he got up, and they all got up, and they went about their business,
Yep.
And I thought,
that's perfect.
That's interesting. I saw a wonderful movie there's a wonderful movie that was made way back when in Italy called Miracle in Milan. And a black and white film, wonderful, amazing story. But anyway, this young boy was an orphan, and he went to live with his grandmother. And one day he's getting a bottle of milk out, and he drops it, and the milk breaks all over the floor, and he's scared to death, you know. So the grandmother comes in and she looks, and she gets a piece of paper and she folds it up into a little sailboat, and she puts it in the milk, and they sat there and watched it float around. I start crying. And then they cleaned up the milk, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, watch that movie if you get a chance. I don't even know where you can find it. Miracle in Milan. It's crazy. Follows this boy that as he grows up, and anyway. Well, I gotta save some stories for next week. So if you guys are
We're
okay with,
here. I hope we're still here.
yeah.
Yes.
Good. Well, thanks all for coming, and I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it
Thank
so
you,
much.
Ross.
And
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
see you
Good
soon.
to be here.
Bye,
Thank
Louise.
you.
Bye,
Have a
Cindy.
nice day.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Okay. Bye, Sam. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Danny. Bye.